many names here, familiar faces. Lon, good to see you. Anna, hi. Bertrand, David, good to see everybody. I think we should, Stephanie, nice to see you there. I can't see everybody all at once, but welcome. Delighted to open our second meeting today of the Committee on Mass Computer Generated and Fraudulent Comments Project. We are looking forward to another productive session today. To get us underway, the first step is to call roll. So Danny's going to do that. I think she's going to call it in 2 rounds. The first will be names of committee members or alternates of committee members. And once she says your name, unmute your mic and then say here so that she can make sure A, that you're here and record that properly, but B, know that your mic is working and we've got good connection. And then after that, she'll call a roll of ACUS members who are not on the committee and their alternates. Again, unmute your mic at that time, say here, and otherwise, by the way, when you're not speaking, it's best to keep your mic muted. So anyway, Danny, you want to get us started with the roll call?
Sure. Carrie, you're first. Carrie,
here.
William Piervincenzi.
Here.
Great. Gary Bass. I don't believe he can make it. Emily Bremer.
Here.
Ilona Cohen.
Here.
I think Peter Constantine can't make it. Stephen Crowley can't make it. Sarah Beardsley.
Here.
Neil Eisner. Andrew Emery is coming late. Cynthia Farina can't make it. Ronald Flagg can't make it. Emily Hammond. Oh,
here.
Great. Michael Hertz. Sally Katzen.
Here.
Hillary Malawar. Oh, actually, Levon Schlichter, excuse me. I believe he is also coming late. Jerry Mashaw.
Here.
Randy May.
Here.
Nina Mendelsohn.
Here.
Rebecca Orban.
Here.
Nick Perillo.
Here.
Nick Pierce.
Here.
Mitchell Plav. I'm not sure if he can make it. David Pritzker.
Here.
Thanks, David. Teresa Roseborough. I don't believe she can make it. Bertrand Ross.
Here.
William Schlakely.
Here.
Anna Shavers.
Here.
Helen Serasio. I think she is coming late. Lon Smith.
Here.
Kevin Stack.
Here.
Robert Stone.
Here.
Tom Sussman.
Here.
Miriam Vincent. I know you're on the phone, so I'll just say that you're here, Miriam. And then Adam White has a conflict. And then non-members of the committee, but alternates or affiliates, Steph Tatham.
Here, thank you.
Christina McDonald. Bob Hinchman. I believe he's coming late. Dan Cohen. Leah Mozena. Okay. Bridget Dooling.
I'm here.
Jim Tozy.
Here.
Let's see. Emily Burns. I think she's also coming late. And Madonna Baucom.
Here, thank you.
Mm-hmm. If there's anyone I missed, just let me know in the chat, but otherwise that should be the members and affiliates. Carrie, back
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Danny. I think as a general rule, anybody whose name was called is has speaking privileges. There may be others on the call observing. If your name wasn't called and you're observer, we will, as time permits, certainly welcome feedback to be recognized in that capacity. If you're an observer here, a member of the public, you can use the chat function. Everyone else certainly use the hand raise function if you'd like. If that's not working, the chat function. If you're on the phone, maybe you can interject and we'll put you in the queue along the way. We have a lot of consultants, terrific consultants on this project. This is an all-star consultant team, and we would certainly welcome your input as well. Obviously, our priority will be for those committee members and others with speaking privileges. Again, when you're not talking, if you could put your mic on mute, that would be appreciated. With that, let me turn things over to Matt Weiner, who has some opening remarks. Matt?
Brief opening remarks. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Carrie. Welcome, everyone. As I said at our last meeting, and I think Carrie suggested, we're very fortunate to have attracted such distinguished members to work on this important recommendation. We have sort of a who's who of administrative law in our virtual room. Thanks to all of you for giving ACUS your scarce time and expertise. I know several of you have foregone other meetings and obligations to be with us here today, and we very much appreciate it. And then thank you, of course, to our esteemed consultants, to Carrie, and then to our staff, Reeve Bull, Research Director, Mark Thompson, Deputy Research Director, and especially Danny for her extraordinary work on this project. Some of it I see has happened late at night. Thank you, Danny. We have several new additions to since the last meeting. I'll just mention a few. They include Sally Katzen of NYU Law School, who's a former OIRA administrator and no less importantly, a former vice chair of ACUS. And Steph Tatham of OIRA, who's OMB's representative to ACUS. Tom Sussman, I see, of ABA fame, and Jerry Mishaw of Yale Law School, our senior fellow who needs no introduction. Before turning the meeting back over to you, Carrie, I would like to call our attention to the council-approved description for this project, which appears on our website. And I think Carrie had indicated that Danny will put a link to the description in the chat function.
Oh, she can just show it right here too.
She can just show it. It may be useful to have the description near when the committee decides upon the scope of the recommendation, especially when it decides what, if anything, the recommendation should say about the appropriate role of public comments in the rulemaking process. For those of you who may have trouble seeing it on the screen or do not have a screen in front of you, let me just read it real quickly. This project seeks to identify agency best practices for handling mass computer-generated and fraudulent comments in rulemakings. Treating each type of comment separately, it examines both the legal and practical issues associated with processing and responding to such comments. It also considers whether there are certain types of rulemaking proceedings where such comments are especially likely to pose particular problems, what remedies are available to agencies in handling such comments, and how agencies might promote transparency, integrity, and consistency in their procedures for addressing such comments. I leave the interpretation of what I've read to the committee. And with that, I'll turn the meeting back to Carrie. Carrie?
Okay, thank you very much, Danny, for displaying that, and Matt for those opening remarks. Just a few other ground rules. We would ask that if you are on the committee or a member of ACUS, that you turn your webcam on. That will be helpful for us to make this as engaging as possible. What other ground rules? Let's see that I haven't covered. Well, only committee members will have any votes. If we do have a vote today, that would be for committee members with voting privileges only. And everybody on the committee, I think, has those voting privileges. If I'm mistaken in any of this, Danny I hope you'll speak up and correct me on that. With that, I think we are ready to get underway with our discussion today. You have, I hope, had a chance to see the new draft of the preamble and set of recommendations. We've also received some informative comments on this. The draft is somewhat revised since the last time, and maybe even substantially reorganized and refocused. What I would like to do is open with what I think is a salient issue that's been reflected in some of the comments about what kind of statement, if anything, the recommendations or the preamble to the recommendation should make about the purpose of public comments, maybe even the nature of comments that agencies will consider. Perhaps that's another way of framing this issue. These are, as Matt said, important issues. They may or may not be really connected with the focus of this project, which, as Matt read, focuses on sort of the handling when these situations do arise where there are mass or computer generated or malattributed comments. As we proceed with the recommendations, though, I think it will be helpful to have some airing of the views about the wisdom or the purpose of comments, in particular in light of mass commenting, I think, which creates a management issue for the handling of these comments. And with that, I'd like to invite those who've sent in some comments. I know Dick Pierce, you had some comments that you shared on this. If you would like to certainly lead us off. I know Nita Mendelson, you shared some comments as well. I think it would be useful as a foundation to going forward to have a airing of these views and see what the connection will be to the recommendation, and how, if all the draft preamble or draft recommendations might need to be written with the committee's understanding of these issues in mind. So if there's anybody wanting to participate who's commented, please just raise your Zoom hand and I'll let us get started. So Dick, go ahead.
Thanks, Kerry. So my concern, I've made pretty clear, is I think the source of this problem is a serious misunderstanding that that notice and comment proceedings are plebiscites. And I think as long as that serious misunderstanding is out there, and it seems, if anything, to be spreading, that we're going to have big problems, that there's going to be basically all sorts of forms of warfare between the pros and the cons, where they're each going to come up with all sorts of ways of using AI and all sorts of other gimmicks to try to come up with more comments than the other side. And I think it's real clear that the number of comments, pro or con, can never be used as a reliable gauge of public opinion. it's hard to imagine a worse method of trying to determine public opinion on an issue than relying on volunteers who are spurred on by people who have a whole lot of money at stake in the outcome of the rulemaking. So that's been my concern, and I had some language, but in light of Nina's strong pushback, Aaron, who couldn't join us today, came up with some compromise language, and if that works for Nina, it works for me, and we might be able to dispense with this issue and move to others.
Okay, why don't we, that was submitted by Aaron in an email exchange that wasn't part of a comment to ACUS, but I'm happy to enter it as a chair, edit or suggestion. And maybe, Danny, just since Dick has mentioned this, why don't we display the draft preamble and at least put it on the table, and then we'll continue in the queue with others who want to comment on this. So just so everybody can understand, we're talking about line 9 on page 1 of the draft preamble, and what Dick referred to was a suggested sentence that could be inserted stating, because notice and comment is not a referendum or plebiscite, an agency cannot make policy decisions simply based on the number of comments that support a particular position. So that would be an insertion early in the preamble following the introduction that indicates that agencies must process, read, and analyze the comments and must seriously consider any significant comment from a person or organization. Then it would follow, because notice and comment rulemaking is not a referendum or plebiscite, an agency cannot make policy decisions simply based on the number of comments that support a particular position. And I take it, Dick, that if that were on the table, then the other suggestions that we've inserted here for from your comment that was submitted, you would withdraw those suggestions. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm hoping that Nina reacts the way I do. I'm very grateful to Aaron for coming up with that language as a means of attempting to satisfy both of my concerns and Nina's concerns. And so if it works for Nina, it works for me. Okay.
Well, are there any questions, first of all, or for clarification at all on this suggestion by Aaron? If so, just ask. Yeah.
Actually, I just want to draw attention to Emily's comment in the chat about airing the issues more broadly before we get to draft language. But I certainly think this moves things in a helpful direction.
I wanted to highlight that simply because Dick had mentioned it. I didn't want anybody to be wondering what this suggestion was. But I agree that we can certainly air the issues as broadly and fully as the committee would like, and we should do that. So with that, if there are no other kind of clarifying questions about that particular suggestion, Nina, you're next in the queue. And I think, Danny, you could stop the share screen, I think, at this point, okay? We can always come back to that if it seems helpful. Okay, Nina.
So I've already, filed lengthy comments. I don't feel that I need to reiterate them. I want to just make a couple quick points and one additional one. So I think the main point I was trying to make is that in many circumstances, agencies have to resolve not just technical questions but questions of value. Those are the kinds of issues where we want to, where the views of ordinary people are likely to be relevant at a minimum. And so I just think we need to be very circumspect about suggesting that comments from ordinary people are somehow on a different, in a different category of value than, you know, comments prepared by trade organizations or comments prepared by people who have paid representation, attorneys who can file, you know, a real piece of advocacy as a comment letter. And I, you know, I gave examples in my comment that I filed yesterday. Let me just say one additional point here, and I was, as I was reading in the NEPA rulemaking docket last night, you know, as one does. And I just want to comment that this is the 2020 rulemaking. The agency actually classified lots of things as mass comment campaigns, and some of them I think meet the profile that Dick is alluding to, the one where I think many people feel these kinds of comments have relatively less value. You know, one line signed by an individual, let's make NEPA stronger, or one line signed by an individual, let's make NEPA weaker. But many comments just didn't fit that profile. So a couple quick examples. The agency had classified as a mass comment campaign letters from about, literally 8-page letters from about 50 different Native American tribes taking a position on the NEPA rule. It were classified as a mass comment campaign, I imagine, because the rules, because the letters shared some common language. So that's a mass comment because it contains, presumably because it contains some duplicative language, but it certainly doesn't meet the profile of the kind of thing that I think Dick would like to see excluded from rulemaking. So there's also, you know, a lengthy letter from a congregation, a Presbyterian congregation in Minnesota, also taking a position on the rulemaking and actually requesting an answer from the agency to their position on you know, how NEPA should be interpreted. So even if we thought that there are particular kinds of comments that are less valuable, the comments without any reasoning, the comments without any context, the comments without facts, you know, there's just such an incredible variety that I just would be very, very concerned about some kind of categorical position that, you know, comments from the public at large should be discouraged, comments that meet a particular profile should be ruled out of hand. So I just wanted to add that to the points that I made in my comments.
Great. Thank you very much, Nina. Randy, you're next.
Thank you, Carrie, and hello, everyone. When we met last, I think I said I generally shared, you know, the concern that was raised by Dick Pierce, you know, without having any opinions at that time about necessarily how to address it. But and, you know, I did relate. I've been intimately involved in the Federal Communications Commission proceedings. And so that's in large part where my own experience comes from. And just as Nina's maybe more familiar with the, you know, the EPA rulemakings or whatever. My comment that I submitted really linked to the statement of one of the FCC commissioners where she urged the readers of her statement to make some noise now. And I guess I react somewhat viscerally to that type of plea from an agency commissioner because it does run against the grain of way I think a lot of us think about what the rulemaking should be and what type of information it should seek. But nevertheless, having said all of that, I didn't have a chance to read. I didn't see Nina's comment, but I heard what she said. I appreciate that. I also appreciated Matt's introduction concerning the scope of the project, which I think has some relevance also to what we're talking about in terms of how deeply we go into this. So I think for my part that language in the preamble probably would satisfy me, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to hang with you for the whole meeting, I'm going to try, but I'm not sure. But I just, if it's okay, Mr. Chairman, I'm just going to read, not because we need to discuss it now, but some language that I had drafted that would just be tacked on to the end of recommendation for the actual recommendation. Going back to my days as a member of the ABA House of Delegates, there was always a distinction between the effect of the preamble and the actual recommendations, and that may not carry here, but in any event, and the preamble actually had we used to say in the ABA House of Delegates, no effect at all. So looking at the recommendation 4, I'm just going to read this language, and again, I may be satisfied with the preamble, but I don't know whether you can put that.
Yeah, Danny, if you could put that up maybe, and then insert this language as a comment so that we can at least memorialize Randy's suggestion.
Okay, and I'm just going to start reading. This is
where would you see this language you're going to read?
At the very end, after organization.
Okay. So if you could insert a comment there, that would be great.
And this would be the addition. But that the sheer number of comments submitted for or against a particular proposal without any substantive analysis ordinarily, I use the word ordinarily, is of little decisional significance. I didn't say no decisional significance, and I said is of little decisional significance. So in any event, that's the way that I was thinking about it when I was trying to address this in a minimally intrusive way that might satisfy the concern that I understood that Dick had and that I had, and maybe some others. Thanks.
Okay. Is that, Randy, can you just make sure that the what is reflected on the screen, are you able to see the comment that Danny is, does that reflect what you read, Alf, and intended?
I can't find my, oh, here, let me get my glasses. Wait, no, I can now. Let me see. It would actually be yeah, I mean, it would be a part of
right, we would add it as a sentence, yes.
Yeah, it would be a comment.
I see, set off, okay.
Yeah, it would, exactly. But that the sheer number of comments submitted without any substantive analysis, comma, I'd add a comma, Danny, ordinarily is of little decisional significance. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Randy. We will return to a consideration of the specific drafting suggestions in a moment, but I wanted to make sure we could record that. And I want to continue with the general discussion that we're having. Sally, you're next.
Well, thank you, Carrie. And I think this is a very helpful discussion to improve the recommendations. And I want to add something which is out of scope and acknowledged to be out of scope, particularly because Matt was careful to read the charge to the committee. I want to acknowledge this is out of scope. Nonetheless, many people have worried over the last decade or so about how to make the rulemaking process more inclusive, particularly to public interest groups, and most particularly to those disadvantaged communities who are nonetheless affected by the rules, but are not at the table and are never heard. There has always been a disproportionate emphasis on the syllable that talks to the regulated entities rather than the regulatory beneficiaries. But even among the beneficiaries, there are the haves and have-nots. And many have struggled with how do we bring the have-nots into the process? the recording of opinion without analysis, without facts, without explication is a baby step that I think is nonetheless significant to the process, to the integrity of the process. It is nonetheless significant, even if it should not be given. I have always agreed with Dick Pierce on this. I've always said this, rulemakings are not plebiscites. We're not taking votes, but we do want to know. And if someone is energized enough to write a one sentence and send it in, I think that should be acknowledged. And therefore, I react, I guess I would say negatively, to that which discourages this baby step. I don't say we have to, because it's out of scope, encourage, but I think anything we put in, and with respect, Randy, I think your comment puts a thumb on the scale, says ordinarily we're not going to consider. Well, there's a hell of a come on for somebody who writes the one sentence. And again, I agree it's not a plebiscite, but I think we need to take a leadership role in expanding the universe of those who contribute to the process when they are affected by the process. And for years, we haven't heard from them. The only other thing, since Randy gave some language, there's Carrie, in the introduction, or the language that Dick agreed to, it says support, the number who support. I would suggest you add or oppose as well.
Yep, right.
Thank you for your patience.
Noted. We've noted that, and we'll make sure when we come to that we add that language for the committee's consideration. Randy, you were invoked there, so if you would like to respond, please go ahead.
I do, and I appreciate Sally's comments, of course, and I understand the ideal, but I just want to again relate what actually has happened in the real world at the FCC. Maybe it hadn't happened at other places, but it in other rulemakings, but I suspect it would at other places if it happened. The last time the FCC did one of these rulemakings, initially when the mass comments came in, and all of this hopefully is reflected in the record, the side that, and I'm just going to be generic about it, that favored net neutrality regulation, they took the lead in generating mass comments, first thousands, hundreds, then millions. The next time, and so they had the far biggest stack of comments. The next time, when a rulemaking was open to repeal net neutrality rules, those that favored the repeal of net neutrality rules, they were ready and organized. And, I don't know, didn't want to know the inner workings of how all of that stuff worked. All I did was draft 50-page comments. but the next time, in the next rulemaking, those that opposed the first group, they were mounted, and they exceeded, so they were ready. They exceeded the number of mass generated comments, whether in all three of these categories. And it was just at that point, it was a war, and among the internals on both sides, it was spoken, it was related as a war to see who could get into the record the most number of comments for counting purposes, for purposes of the plebiscite. So that's the concern. And at the end of the day, I don't know whether that really furthered, it was fine to hear what Sally said about the underrepresented and people that didn't participate before and haven't participated. So in this case, the war was on. and now I think everyone knows how it can be played. And, that's the concern that I have, that I think in one way or another, we ought to try and address here, at least gently, maybe to make a point. Thanks.
Hey, I'll let Sally, if you want to respond, and then I'm going to go to the queue. Okay, Sally. All right. Then Emily, you're next.
So I love this discussion. I think this is a really great and important conversation we're having. I really shared Dick's concerns, and I really found Nina's counterpoints to be extremely persuasive. I completely agree with Sally that this is a big issue, and an issue that ACUS has sort of nibbled around the edges of for years. I mean, this was, part of our legal considerations recommendation, part of the social media recommendation. And I think the sort of bigger and more sort of philosophical question of how agencies should welcome and use these kinds of comments is one that's deserving of direct examination by ACUS. I think also that the question of mass comments can be sort of broken into two components. One is the kind of technical question of how do you process this volume? And then the other question is, how do you consider the comments once you have managed to process them? And I think we could very easily include the sort of technical process question in this recommendation and sever off that deeper, more philosophical question to wrap into a project that includes the things that Sally has identified as being out of scope of this particular project. And then this is sort of unrelated, but I just want to throw it out there too. The other concern I have about the recommendation as it's presently formatted is these are problems that don't crop up all the time. And right now, and I'm all for transparency, and I think agencies should have written policies on a lot of things, but I do wonder about the utility of encouraging them to have written policies to address things that rarely, if ever, come up and that might be most usefully dealt with by the centralized authority that runs regulations.gov. So some of the recommendations are formatted not as best practices of how you should process and deal with these technical challenges, but agencies should have policies to address. And I wonder if it might be better not to filter all of these best practices through that sort of veneer of a written policy, but rather just tell agencies what the best practices are for dealing with these issues when they arise, such that an agency, when it becomes relevant, could point to ACUS's recommendation as explaining how it's going to deal with these challenges. And then marshaling to a greater extent the value of the centralized authority of the e-rulemaking program to make those tools, the technical tools, available, and especially in a dynamic way going forward, so that this recommendation doesn't become out of date, which is one concern I know we've all had.
Thank you very much, Emily. And I think that is a helpful distinction to make between the technical questions and the how do you actually consider the comments. Let me just say one reading, at least, of the current draft could be to say that these policies that are recommended are encouraging agencies to answer that second question for themselves and have it answered up front, so that when the rare event happens, they have actually thought it through and inform the public too of what they think the answer to that second question might be. That could be one way of reading what the draft recommendations are calling for with the policy. I put that out there in case it's helpful. I don't know, Emily, if you wanted to respond at all in any way to that kind of reading of the draft recommendations.
I think you can read it that way, but I don't think it's the most natural reading of the recommendation as currently formulated. So if that's what we want to do to highlight this for agencies and get them thinking about it, then I think we should probably do that more directly. and more clearly separated from the technical components of the recommendation.
Okay. Great, thank you. Bertrand, you're next.
Thanks, Carrie. Good to be with you all. And I apologize, I'll have to leave early as well for teaching obligations, but I just wanted to say something about the preamble that might be related to recommendation 4. So I agree with Dick that notice and comment rulemaking is not a plebiscite, and perhaps that that message may need to be projected more broadly. And so comments should not be treated as votes, but I think that they might serve the analogous function as voting in this particular way that comports with what Nina has written, what Sally has said. Social science studies have shown that voting for many is the first step to broader, more sustained and intense engagement in the political process. Now, I'm not sure that there are similar studies regarding comments, but I could imagine that comments, even those one-liners expressing opinions, or even those mass comments that are merely signed on to, can serve as the entry point for broader participation by typical non-commenters from typically non-commenting communities. And I think that it's important that these recommendations not convey or add to the barriers to entry for these non-typical commenting communities, because I think that I think that one of the goals I want to see the administrative process serve is to encouraging broader and more diverse participation in the process. And so it's just something that I think we should be mindful of when offering these recommendations to agencies. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bertrand. Nina, you're next.
Just very quickly, because I've already spoken, but I, certainly strongly agree with Bertrand and Sally and Emily's points, all of them. And just wanted to add that I think the most useful thing that agencies could be doing is informing and educating rather than burdening and erecting a barrier. But I do hope that we'll clarify that this particular recommendation isn't tackling the issue of what exactly agencies should be doing with these comments. The consultants did not ask agencies what they find useful or not useful, did not try to detect best practices on this particular issue. And so ideally we would leave this particular issue for another day rather than trying to kind of prejudge it by making a statement in this particular recommendation.
That's an excellent suggestion. And it actually maybe is something also that the consultants might want to weigh in on. To what extent, if at all, do you feel like your report or your research actually speaks to the value or how to consider comments that might be nearly identical or very brief? I see that we also have some comments in the chat, but Emily, you were a consultant. Do you want to speak first to that question? Then Bill will come to your suggestion in the chat.
Sure, thanks. And thank you all for this really great discussion. From my perspective, and I think I can speak for the other consultants here, but obviously they can chime in if not. I think that resolving this issue was really not what we considered to be within the scope of the project. We did recognize it to be an issue as we were working, but didn't focus on it. And so I very much appreciate the comments that suggest we delineate it as an issue, but then are careful both to refrain from making any judgmental comments in this work about the value of mass comments, but also I think the way Emily Bremer suggested, it's a great idea to tee it up as another project.
Okay, thank you. So, I mean, one way, let me just distill this and offer this for the committee as a distillation perhaps of some of the comments here, is that we could view a situation where an agency receives millions of maybe nearly identical or very brief and largely non-substantive comments as something that is either to be celebrated as a sign of healthy democratic and civic culture, or maybe something to be denigrated as just some kind of interest group ploy to try to gin up numbers. But I take it that neither the consultants nor really the scope of the project here is intending to either celebrate nor to denigrate those kind of situations, but rather to accept that they happen and to help inform agencies of what to do when they happen, how to handle the mass of comments that should come in, and how with specific issues such as, do we put all 20 million identical comments, let's say, in regulations.gov as separate entries, or can we put representative ones in there? Those are the type of, I think, in Emily's terms, I was hearing to be kind of the technical questions of what to do, the practical issues that arise, but not necessarily to take a position one way or another about whether those occurrences, of those outlying occurrences too, where there's such an outpouring of public comment in support of or opposing or both, but just to say that that happens, what should agencies do? With that, as a suggestion for the committee, I do want to turn to Bill's comment. Bill, do you want to explain what you've put in the chat?
Sure thing. So you can see what I wrote, of course, and I think what it comes down to, and a lot of what I'm hearing today so far, is dancing around the word significant. So we have an obligation to consider and respond to significant comments. And what comments are significant and varies by rulemaking. For example, if as a banking agency we're doing a capital rule, the comment from the guy who mows the lawn at the bank probably going to be less significant than the comment from somebody who works in capital markets. But there are times when the comments that are either mass generated or otherwise from the public are actually super duper useful, either to give a sense of how powerful the reaction of the industry is to a particular idea, or just because it doesn't take any particular expertise. Now, I don't think we can come up with a policy at the outset that's going to address what's significant when. And that means that regardless of how you decide to document the fact that you got these comments, keep them on regulations.gov, what have you, regardless of what you do with the mechanics, with the decision-making itself, I think each rule you have to approach from a fresh place. That is, like, you can't just establish at the outset how you're going to treat a mass-generated comment in a given rule. I think we need to be careful as we structure these recommendations, but I think we need to recognize there can be some value in getting crushed by a bunch of comments. I'm thinking back in 1998. The banking agencies haven't had a lot of this, just so you know where I'm coming from. But in 1998, long before I took admin law from Professor Mendelsohn, the agencies put out a proposal for knowing your customer. And we got what still amounts to the most comments we've ever gotten. It was about 240,000 comments. And we actually did have to look at them by hand because at the time we didn't have decent software for sorting through them. it was very useful for the agency principals to get it through their heads that, boy, the industry really didn't like it. Most of these comments were not substantive. Oh, it's too technically difficult, et cetera, et cetera. But we really literally got 100,000 comments that looked like this. Hi, I'm so-and-so, a teller at such and such bank. I'm so-and-so, the janitor at such and such bank. Where they actually identified, this is who I am. And yeah, I don't know anything about this rule, but I'm submitting a comment anyway. That gave us a hint that the management had very strong feelings, and it was instrumental actually in withdrawing the rule, which ultimately might have been the right public policy.
Very helpful, Bill, to have a concrete example on the table. In terms of just clarifying your comment in the chat, were you intending that comment in the chat as language to be added to the preamble or a recommendation in somewhere, or was it reflecting the views that you've just elaborated here?
Well, you know, I have to say, every word that I write is a jewel that certainly can be, no, I'm kidding.
It should be memorialized, right?
It started off as, that's right. It is, you're certainly, if you find any value in it, it's certainly something that I would not object to showing up in the preamble somewhere. But I wasn't necessarily offering it as language that needs to go in.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that too. I appreciate that. Sally, you're muted. So.
Hey, thank you, Carrie. I wanted to come back, and by the way, the reference to that last rulemaking reminds me, this has been going on for a while. We did the cigarette rules back in the 90s, is to bar cigarette sales to minors. And that was one where we got hundreds of thousands of people who were either pro or anti-smoking. And we had one sentence in the final rule that said there were X number in favor and X number opposed. And that was relatively easy to do. So it has been happening, and it probably will continue to happen and maybe happening more, particularly if it is the first step to true engagement. But I want to agree with Bill and say that I hope that some of his language does go somewhere. And building on something Randy May said, my understanding, and it may have changed, is that the preamble is just that, a preamble. And it's the recommendations that have the, if you will, force of an ACUS recommendation. And so I'm going to suggest something a tad aggressive, but those of you who know me know that that's not unusual. I'm going to suggest that either in the preamble or, God forbid, a footnote to the preamble should flag the issue of a desire not to encourage, not put in the negative, but a desire to encourage increased and enhanced participation by those affected, either burdened or benefited by a regulation. And to that end, ACUS will be undertaking a further deep dive into the subject matter. And you can put it in nice language or whatever. We don't normally do those kinds of things. Everything is supposedly self-contained. But there's a lot of efforts going on. It was one of the items identified in President Biden's January 20th memorandum about modernizing rulemaking. And there are efforts going on, and I think ACUS should indicate it's part of the solution. It wants to contribute to the discussion one way or the other, and suggest that the preamble might be a place to slip that in.
So the committee could celebrate and encourage, even in some sense, this effort to have a broader proportion of the public comment on rules. that could be one approach that the committee wants to take in the preamble. Another could be, as I think we've also heard, to really try to say that agencies should signal very clearly that while people may well still contribute one-liners or identical comments in mass campaigns, that it's only the substantive information and the technical information that agents. So that we've got sort of two ends of either celebrating mass commenting or if not outright denigrating it, at least highlighting its irrelevance. Is there a sense from committee members of which direction you'd want to go? A third option would be to try to say, again, the focus of this project is not, maybe one suggestion could be in the preamble, or this middle ground here could be to say there are differing views on the value of mass comments, and to clarify that this recommendation is leaving that value choice and the choice about when and how to consider any comment to be up to the agency. But when they have a situation where they're confronted with a large volume of comments, many of which are identical, here's some strategies for managing the mass and processing these comments. That could be, if you will, a third approach. Maybe there's a fourth approach that someone wants to suggest from the committee. But I think in some sense, we probably need to, at least in principle, see where the committee wants to go on this spectrum, if you agree that there's this spectrum of views from celebrating to, if not denigrating, again, pointing to the functional irrelevance or to something somewhere in the middle. I think it's important for us to really kind of have some common sense of where we want to go with this recommendation if we before we turn to really getting to the nuts and bolts of how it's worded. So I really would encourage committee members to weigh in. Maybe even if someone thinks it's appropriate, we could take a bit of a straw poll, if you will, to see which direction the committee might want to go. Randy, you're next in the queue. And oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. Can I interrupt for one moment? I see in the chat, I have a request from the vice chair, Matt Weiner. Can I allow him to intervene for one moment? Would that be okay, Randy?
Sure, of course.
Matt?
I'd just like to make one point apropos of this discussion and everything. I like very much what Sally Katzen offered. One request from the committee, it would be perfectly appropriate for the committee and the recommendation, in my view, to suggest future ACUS initiatives. I would prefer that there is not a declaration in the recommendation that ACUS will do X, Y, and Z. Maybe I misheard some of the comments because under our statute, that can't happen without the consent of our council. Number two, and I'll just mention this very briefly and we can talk about it later, or I can elaborate it on a later time. As I had announced to the membership in a recent email, ACUS will be putting on some kind of substantial forum this summer on participation in the rulemaking process in furtherance of the president's executive order, about which we've talked, but more generally on the issue of participation in the rulemaking process by underrepresented communities. And just as a large-scale forum we did laid the groundwork for this recommendation and this project, I could very well see that that forum that I referred to over the summer could lay the groundwork for an additional recommendation project or project. So that's all I wanted to say, Carrie, and thanks for the indulgence.
Okay, and thank you to Randy as well, who's next in the queue. And Dick, I see you have you put in a comment or the chat that you would like to enter. So I will add you to the queue following Nina, going by the raised hands that are in the participants. So Randy, you're next.
Thank you, Carrie. It seems like we're conducting a bit of a plebiscite here, so I was just going to vote. You know, my preference would be that we take a middle ground, somewhat like you suggested, and not put in the preamble something that would be in the nature of more celebratory or more of a strong endorsement for you know, the issue that we're really going to address. It sounds like perhaps, not to lock anyone in, but perhaps in a future ACUS study. So I could see going that way. And I do, you know, I'm glad that I did understand the difference between the preamble and the recommendation. So what I said earlier, that was just language I was playing around with last night. I would be perfectly happy for my part that the resolution of this take place in the preamble. And so I guess the bottom line for me is I just don't think it's the place, particularly given what Matt said about the scope earlier, and when we all listened to the scope of the project, to be tilting our hand too much about how we're going to address the issue of mass comments in a further study if we do that, and not in a way that seems to encourage those comments that don't contain any analysis. I'd rather at least defer that.
Okay, thank you. Bertrell, you're next.
Carrie, I like your suggestion with respect to thinking about our proposal as focused on strategies for helping agencies manage mass comments. I think that is how I see the recommendations, and I think that's how they should, what the focus should be. And I think the only thing I would just add is that I don't think that one of the strategies for managing mass comments should be to discourage comments. And that's the, kind of the caveat I would like to make sure is not included or can't be, or that I hope won't be interpreted in that way. And so that's, kind of the two sides of it that I see.
Right. Okay. And I think, one concern that, in that respect and we can talk about it more when we get to the specific draft, I'm going to suggest in some way, if we want to be somewhat neutral here and just take these comments for what they are when they come in, and whether it's good or bad or otherwise, or whether it's helpful or not, we're going to leave that to the agency. I think in that, just to build on what you said, Bertrell, we might want to think about how lumping mass comments with computer generated and even fraudulent comments might inadvertently, at least, or implicitly suggest that mass comments are on the same plane as something that might be fraudulent and criminal. So if we go that middle ground, then there may be some things we need to think about changing, perhaps, or at least clarifying in that regard as well. I have Kevin Stack, and then Nina, and then Dick Pierce. I have you in the queue. Okay, so Kevin.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really enjoyed the dialogue here, and I just wanted to basically support, in a way, the conversation that's been developing with Bertrell and Carrie along the way, saying that we should, really focus on the technical aspects of, or that seems like the recommendations, the heart of it is focused on the technical aspects of how agencies process these, and just simply maybe note in a very descriptive way, as you're suggesting, Carrie, that there are complex issues that are raised by mass comments, and maybe distinct issues by other the categories addressed by the rule, and we're not taking a stance on how those directly should bear on the agency's decisional processes, something along those lines, because those are rich issues as we see. So that seems, so just wanted to suggest endorsement of that.
Right. I mean, and if this leads to maybe the insertion of a paragraph that, as you say, describes the different views on, if you will, the merits, so to speak, then we don't have to draft that today. We could ask ACUS staff to come back with a draft additional paragraph for our next meeting. Just noting that. Nina, you're next.
Just quickly, and this is in the vein of you're conducting a informal plebiscite on these issues, right? So in light of what you just said, that you would worry that that the recommendation could be read as equating mass comments with fraudulent comments and computer generated comments. I mean, that raises a concern. I do feel it is really critical to avoid any implication that participation should be discouraged. So maybe that runs in the vein of a comment such as that suggested by Sally, that we want to encourage engagement, broad scale engagement in rulemaking, and couple that with a reference to paragraph 4 on informing and educating people on how best to engage and participate. But it does seem, given your point, that some kind of positive statement might really be a good step.
Mm-hmm. Do we want to highlight the particular paragraph that you were referencing, Danny? Could you put that on the screen just so we could just see exactly where? Is that okay,
simply
Nina?
Sure, of course. That's
is it a recommendation number 4 or paragraph 4?
Paragraph saying that agencies should actually provide materials informing commenters what kinds of information they find most useful. And of course, that's going to vary by agency and by statutory regime. I think this is a very useful recommendation.
Right. Okay. All right. So you think that as that's written, it is helpful in guiding agencies, perhaps even to encourage public participation if they deem that appropriate? Is that what I'm just wanting? I'm sorry.
I didn't have specific language to suggest.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I just, I think the point of recommendation 4 is a valuable one and is participation encouraging.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate that clarification, at least for my benefit. So I have Dick Pierce next in the queue.
Thanks, Kerry. I wanted to build a bit on Sally's idea of this footnote to the preamble, because I think what Sally and I are talking about are two very different phenomena, and I'm in complete agreement with Sally on the point that I believe she's making. What we're dealing with here is a classic example of Mansur Olson's problem of collective action, where if you've got a dispute between an individual with $1 million at stake and 10 million people, each with $1 at stake, the one with $1 million, the one person will win every time, unless the 10 million can figure out how in the world to overcome the problem of collective action and figure out how to organize and put together resources. That is a very, very difficult problem to solve, but I agree completely that it is well worth trying to solve versus the way that this has worked out in the net neutrality context and I think also in the context of that FDIC rulemaking. I think that FDIC was absolutely right to say, that's not coming from a janitor. That's coming from an employee who was told, do this, okay? And so what concerns me is this business where there's people with a whole lot of money at stake, but what they're doing is putting their resources into the process of manipulation and coercion to get, to figure out how to get 1 million, 10 million, 20 million people to come in and say either it's great or it's not. And that I think we don't want to encourage. There may be a way of drafting a footnote to the preamble that makes that distinction. And I'd be glad to give it a crack at it and send it to Sally, who will, as always, tell me I've got it all wrong. And then submit it. I can't make the third meeting, but at least I can draft a suggested footnote that distinguishes between those two different, very, very different kinds of comments.
The manipulated mass comments is what you might be concerned about. That we want to promote in the spirit of Sally's suggestion, if I'm hearing you right, promote the sincere and if you will, authentic public participation, even if that participation is a one-word sentence. But if it's a one-word sentence that's been manipulated, Dick, that would be problematic or of concern. It certainly makes it hard for the agency to know what inference to draw from that, I suppose.
And certainly you wouldn't want to draw the inference that janitors find this banking regulation to be problematic for them. We know that's not what's going on.
Okay. Thank you. And appreciate your willingness to offer suggestions, which are always welcome. Nick?
Thanks, Carrie. I just want to say I agree with your point from earlier that putting mass comments in an undifferentiated set with fraudulent and computer-generated comments may inadvertently imply that mass comments as a category are abusive in the same way that fraudulent and computer-generated comments as a category are abusive. And I mean, obviously some mass comments could be abusive if we look to the coercion issue that Dick just raised, but I don't think we want to imply that they're abusive as a category. And I don't think that the recommendation overall conveys that, but perhaps some of the framing and presentation, and especially the title, does. I mean, the consultants and the committee are putting these three things together quite understandably because they raise a common set of technological and managerial challenges, or related technological and managerial challenges. And so maybe the title could be something along the lines of technological and managerial challenges in managing comments or something, as opposed to putting mass on a level with fraudulent and computer generated.
Yes, that's an excellent suggestion. For changing the title, we would need to get, I think, council approval for that, but it should be something that the committee recommends.
You don't
as
need
part
council.
of an effort. Or no, we don't need council.
The committee, I don't usually like to take positions, but I would like to strongly associate myself with Nick's suggestion. I think that will be very well received from some of the folks who have raised concern that we've lumped some of these phenomena together. But in direct response on this issue to your question, Carrie, what the committee should do is when it votes on the recommendation, it should vote on a new title, and the assembly would then decide what the title, whether to accept the title change. And I would imagine that it almost certainly would.
Okay. All right. So I stand corrected. It's not the council approval, but we would need approval at the plenary from the assembly, but we can certainly suggest that. Nick, did you have something further to add? No. Okay. And I'm delighted that a couple of our consultants have raised their hands, because I was about to turn to you as well for your thoughts and guidance on this discussion. So Bridget, you're next.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Bridget Juling. I was one of the consultants on this project and really enjoying the discussion today. Thank you all very much for putting everything on the table that you already have. I just have a very brief digression on computer-generated comments. I think when I started this project, I didn't really think a lot about the potential value of computer-generated comments. And so it was easy to kind of lump mass in one category and computer generated and fake or fraudulent or malattributed into another. And one of the joys of this project has been really sitting with these different categories and thinking about, what are they? What are the characteristics of them? What do they mean? What's their significance? What are their normative implications, et cetera? And I have to say, on computer generated comments, the thing that has surprised me the most is that I can sort of now think of use cases where computer generated comments could actually be really awesome. And so I would encourage folks to not sort of lump. I think we're all good with saying that, fake, fraudulent, malattributed are like squarely in the bad column. I would say the computer generated, it's a mixed bag. And I would say it's really hard to draw, good, bad lines in this discussion, as we've been talking about in the mask category as well. So anyway, this is all a long way of saying that I'm sorry, Danny, it's going to be hard to draft this, but just to put in your mind that the category of computer generated comments is a little bit more muddled than you might think at first blush.
Bridget, is there an example that you came across that what helped prompt the epiphany you described? I mean, is there something you could share with us that would indicate why or under what circumstances
yeah, I mean,
comment might be helpful?
I'm not a technologist or a futurist by any any sort of definition of that, but the thought that came to mind for me in the course of this project was thinking about something analogous to a fraud alert on your credit card. We love those are helpful to us, right? It sort of says, did you buy a diamond bracelet in Albuquerque this morning? Well, no, I did not. So thank you. So, the incentives are in place for the credit card companies to have those. But I generally feel warmly towards that it's sort of looking out for me. And I'm confident that there's no human there sitting observing my credit card transactions, right? So the idea that there could be bots that are out there sort of looking for information to glean and then help feedback to the government, I think is at least a category of behavior that we might want to leave a lane for when we think about the potential for the way computer generated comments could grow and evolve. And more that you don't want to sort of label them as bad and sort of push them out and build systems that prohibit them or policies that prohibit them, because it's plausible that you could see something actually quite functional and that people would come to feel, good about the idea that there were bots out there sort of cultivating comments on their behalf, especially because of the collective action problems associated with commenting that we've talked so much about today. So anyway, that's just an example. I don't have a particular case I can show you where it was put to good use. It's more just about imagining a future where it could be constructive and wanting to leave a lane for that to happen and grow.
Thanks, Bridget. And I guess that might, especially given how that category of comment might evolve into the future, might also reinforce the notion that, at least in this recommendation, the committee might want to be kind of careful to try to be neutral toward them and not necessarily automatically not claim that automatically just because something is computer generated it's a problem too. Okay, thank you, Michael. Please help edify us.
Well, now that's too big a challenge. I'm going to mute myself. I wanted to say three quick things, two of which just echo what Emily and Bridget already said. The first is, this whole conversation has been great. We had similar conversations among ourselves with a similar range of views. I think maybe a little more compressed within the consultants than in this larger group, but very familiar. And we ended sort of where the larger group seems to be ending, which is to not take this on in the committee. So, when, as Emily said, the report doesn't grapple with what is the value of mass comments, when are they valuable, when are they not, kind of question. The second thing is with regard to the computer generated. Look, the reason people are appalled by computer generated comments is because they think it's a plebiscite. Right. In other words, when computer generated comments are appalling is if you're counting the number of comments and then you say, wait, a computer wrote this. If a computer is actually able to produce the kind of comment Dick Pierce wants and everybody wants, then it's actually not problematic. It's useful, right? And so conceivably, if 100,000 computer generated comments that say we like the rule, we don't, are the worst possible version of mass comments, to the extent mass comments are problematic, right? But a computer generated comment that actually is substantive or provides a useful piece of information should not be discouraged or rejected just because a computer produced it. An agency that should be happy to have it. The third thing is just with regard to Nick's suggestion about the sort of scope or nature or title of the project, where the consultants ended up, for what it's worth, was to say, what these three things have in common is, yes, they all existed already in some form before e-rulemaking existed. Sally gave the example of the FDA cigarette rulemaking, right? The classic example, it's mentioned in the report. But though they all existed, they have all been maybe even exponentially increased or made possible through technology, right? So the new technology of e-rulemaking has increased the volume or extent of each of these particular kinds of activities. And that's what they have in common. Not that they're all bad or that they're inherently bad. Just how do we confront the new challenges to old activities that are created by technological changes.
Okay, so I guess we've devoted some time now to this general issue, and it's been a very informative discussion. And Michael, you did, I think, help edify very much, as has everyone else. Would it be fair to say, would there be any objections in principle, at least, to agreeing that going forward as we look at the draft language in the preamble and the recommendations, that the principle here should be to focus on largely the management questions without, and I would borrow the insightful comment from Bertrand, without necessarily discouraging mass commenting. And then the question will be, if we want to try to be neutral, how well does the current draft doing that? Are there, as Emily earlier suggested, some recommendations that might be unnecessary, perhaps, or overly burdensome for agencies that are not needed, or do they need to be reframed? But I guess I would really appreciate if there is anybody who would have any objection to where I think the conversation has sort of turned to trying to maintain that focus on the management and practical challenges that agencies have, without necessarily, celebrating any more than I think a lot of ACUS recommendations have. Certainly public participation in general is something ACUS has, I think, in other contexts, been on the record in favoring, certainly. So we favor that, but we're not going to necessarily want to say every rule should have a mass comment campaign, nor say that we should, agencies should adopt policies to discourage them either. Is that, I mean, as a general principle, seem like a good strategy to go? All right, Lon is a real thumbs up, not a Zoom generated thumbs up even. With that, if they're not hearing any objections, what I'd like to do is take a short break. We've been at this for about half of our meeting time, so this seems like a good opportunity to take about what I would say would be about an 8-minute break. If I have 11:27 right now, so I would suggest we come back at 11:35, and at that point in time, we will dig into recommendations, recognizing that once we have the recommendations a little bit clearer in mind, that might be a good time to go back and then revisit the preamble with the recommendations in mind and with our general principle in mind that we've talked about here, to see what might need to be reworked, whether there's a footnote that needs to be added or what have you. So with that, let me urge us, we'll come back at 11:35. and continue our discussion. Thanks.
Rather than it just being offered as sort of standalone comments. And then everybody can see at the next meeting what the staff has done and can react to it.
Right, that's fine. I mean, obviously, if someone wants to submit it as a comment,
No, they can submit it as a comment. That's fine. But
okay. But yes, we will use that. The point would be we will use that input in doing some revisions. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, that's what you want to emphasize.
Yes, what I would recommend against, to be more direct, is I would recommend against sort of appointing a single member of the committee to sort of serve as the drafter here.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, I welcome any suggestions anybody wants to make, and they would be submitted as comments, and we will take those into account as we redraft in light of this conversation. And you know, that I don't know that really, you know, really we're that far off from where we ended up. So I don't know that by redrafting, I don't want to suggest that it's a wholesale revision that would be necessary. But if somebody thinks that, they should certainly weigh in if that's their view.
No, and I didn't mean to suggest. I did not mean to suggest otherwise. But there were some. I think there seems to be a consensus on certain important points that were articulated by Sally, Emily, Nina, and so on, that probably should be reflected in the revised preamble.
Right, and we welcome concrete suggestions for what those revisions should look like. So welcome back, everyone. We will get underway. And just as a point of process, as Matt indicates, if you have been listening, please, in light of our last hour and a half's worth of discussion, you have concrete suggestions, please send those in as soon as possible, so that you know, the ACUS staff can process them. I'll process them. You know, they'll be duly noted as comments, you know, if you submit them as comments, so everyone can see them. But I think the aim will be to try to distill and synthesize the discussion and anything that comes in to try to reflect the kind of middle path, if you will, that we've been discussing, in which we're really focusing on the practical managerial aspects of these situations involving the three types or categories of comments. I will also preface as we go in, normally, you know, ACUS recommendations can be done in 3 meetings. I hope that that's what this committee can do as well. Some committees, I think, finish in 2 meetings. I don't think we're going to do that, but let's see if we can be, you know, as efficient as is, you know, appropriate, while still airing whatever perspectives or views that committee members have, or ACUS members have to share. At this point in time, Danny, I wonder if you could display the version of the draft recommendations, because I'd like to turn to the recommendations themselves. Before we do, I do want to highlight the one last paragraph in the preamble, just because, not that I want to wordsmith that paragraph, but at least just highlight that that's there in case anybody didn't have a chance to look fully at the draft. The very last paragraph there, you know, says that ACUS recognizes that these recommendations, you know, may not really be something that many agencies will find that they need to act on tomorrow. But they are there as agencies see that they do have to deal with some of these management challenges associated with processing large volumes of comments or trying to interpret or classify computer generated or deal with malattributed comments. So with that noted, we could turn to the first recommendation. And what I'd like to do is have people have a chance to digest what that first draft recommendation is and offer comments on them. And I take it that the comment that we've inserted here with Dick Pierce's suggestion it was a matter related to what we've just spent the last hour and a half discussing, and will be a matter that the staff will try to digest and incorporate in the next. Yeah, you could put it as resolved for right now, Dick, if you don't have any objection to that. Let's focus on the sort of the substance of this first recommendation here. When needed, agencies should publish policy statements about the posting and use of mass computer-generated and malattributed comments. These statements should take into account the meaningfulness of the public's opportunity to participate in the rulemaking process and should balance concerns such as user-friendliness, transparency, and informational completeness. In their policy statements, agencies may provide for exceptions in appropriate circumstances. If anybody has any comments on this proposed language here, please feel free to raise your hand in the Zoom chat. It looks like Steph, you're first. And you may need to unmute your mic.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Let me start by saying that apologies for missing the first meeting, but we very much appreciate all of the work that went into redrafting the recommendation. We think it's headed in a great direction. A couple of questions on this one. In the first clause, when needed, just wondering what work the when needed is doing. I think, either just trying to understand what are the circumstances when agencies should be doing this versus when they shouldn't be doing it. Wondering about the use of the word policy statement and if that should just be guidance or if policy statement is a term of art here. And then, I'm wondering if this is limited to mass computer generated and malattributed comments just because of the scope, or if it's worth mentioning that this should be in the same place as the broader public comment policy.
Okay, thank you. And maybe just offer my own reading of the when needed might be actually the I think raised, the answer to that might be raised by your last point. To the extent that an agency already has a policy on this, it might not be needed, but in some sense, that's always true of any ACUS recommendation. If they've already implemented it, they don't have to implement it again. So it may be that when needed is superfluous, especially in light of that final paragraph of the preamble. I welcome other comments on Steph's questions or comments, or any other comments or concerns about this first draft recommendation. Emily, will you go?
Yeah, so this is sort of in keeping with what I said earlier, and I agree with Steph that the when needed should probably be replaced with something that's a little clearer. But I wonder if we should dive in at the beginning of the recommendation by giving advice on best practices about how to manage these comments, and not, as I sort of suggested earlier, filtering that advice through language about a policy or any kind of written document. And maybe at the end of the recommendation, have a one paragraph on, transparency that suggests that in, agencies facing whatever circumstances we think are the right circumstances to cover that when needed language, right, should consider, writing it down or making it transparent. I mean, obviously that's not the language you would want to use, but sort of putting that by itself so that the recommendations, most of the recommendations, and especially the recommendations at the beginning, dive right into the problem and give that the front stage attention.
Sure. Okay. Well, let's. I think that's a perfectly sensible strategy. Here's what we do, and then at the end, let's let the public know what we're going to do. Approach. Unless there's other comments from the committee, I think that's an eminently sensible suggestion. If you wanted to move it, of course, if there's other views on the committee, please feel free to interject. Then the question is do we have, if we do move it, are there any concerns about what indeed is being recommended here? Okay. All right, let's move to noting the when needed could be clarified. Policy statements could be changed to a different word, such as guidance, or just policy in general, perhaps. And then also maybe making some reference to how this could be part of a larger policy on comments. I take it are 3 options for the ACUS staff to just fine tune this. Sarah.
Hi, thanks. Just a small wording point. As between the terms policies, policy statements, and guidance, I think speaking from the FDA perspective, we probably prefer policies. Guidance is kind of a specific term in FDA parlance, and it has a particular process associated with it that we might not want to go through for this. And policy statement I think of as somewhat connected to that term in the APA, although it's not identical. So my preference would be policy, but welcome thoughts from others.
Okay. So just policy by itself, or policies plural by itself. Okay, Rebecca.
Thank you. To Sarah's point, I wonder if instead that line could say that agencies should inform the public, because that would leave us, inform the public about the posting and use. That would leave us some space, for agencies where this doesn't come up very often. There are places in the docket where you could explain what you did. There's a place in perhaps in your NPRM preamble or your final rule preamble where you explain what you did. That would provide a little more latitude, maybe.
Right. Exactly, and it could be that, in a particular rulemaking where perhaps the agency is anticipating that they may have these issues, that would be the place to put it, rather than in some generic document. Also taking into account what I think Bill had mentioned earlier, is that it may vary from rule to rule how these things play out. Sarah, did you want to add further? I think you're muted still.
No, I think I need to lower my hand. Sorry about that.
Okay. All right. Great. Okay. Okay. Excellent suggestions, and we'll take those to heart and come back for the next meeting with that revision. I think those are all modest changes that would be called for. Even the moving of it would certainly be fine. Let's take a look at number 2, if we may, Danny. Now, does this have anything that was deleted, or is just this red underline suggested additional material? Danny, do you?
So, yeah, so based off of comments from last meeting, we deleted or combined, I believe it was, there was a bullet point D that was combined and synthesized during the last meeting, but otherwise it's the same based off of comments from the last meeting.
And the red, go ahead.
Yeah, with the addition of the chair amendment in red.
Okay, so this is an additional comment that could be added. I thought at least wanted to put forward to the committee for consideration. And it goes to some extent to the larger question about whether to discourage or treat neutrally comments that may be submitted identically. There are places where agencies are reporting the number of comments, whether that's informative or not. It's happening. Regulations.gov lists the number of comments. Agencies in the Federal Register preambles will indicate number of comments. So the issue arises when agencies are simply publishing, let's say, a representative example of multiple identical comments. How do they count that? And you know, if it's counted just as one comment and there's several thousand that are identical, does that implicitly and maybe unintentionally somehow diminish or in some sense erase the fact that there were 7,000 other people who made that same comment? So that is what the addition is intended to try to address. Let's open that up, the whole recommendation, as well as that suggested addition, for your consideration and discussion. Nina, you're first.
I'm just, I have a question and a comment. The question is, what kind of problem is this aimed at solving? Do agencies not simply want to post the comments? You know, I'm just wondering why this is needed. The other is, actually, there's 2 quick comments. The comment is, you know, again, not all mass comments are created alike. There may be lots of duplication, but the duplication may be quite substantive. There may be important pieces of context that are omitted even when a comment is substantially identical to another one. And I mentioned the tribal comments as an example of this, but there are certainly others, including the part of the country a person may be writing from or the community they may be representing. The other is a comment, and I noted the reference to orchestrating elsewhere in the recommendation, but I missed this one. I am concerned that the use of the term orchestrating is a little pejorative, as if the people who sign on to these campaigns are just under the control and direction of the person organizing them. So I would propose that orchestrating be replaced by something more neutral, like organizing, or I think organizing would be better. I think
it's a fair point. Yeah. I think we, and Danny, I think you certainly could change that at this point as well to organizing. As to your first question, Nina, and I invite committee comment, I will just offer my own understanding of the nature of the problem. Maybe the consultants would like to weigh in on this as well. I mean, there's just there is from a standpoint of managing these comments, do we scan or you know, create entries for each and every million comments if they're all the same? So that's one issue, I think, for the agency. The second, quite frankly, is from the standpoint of the public. and public participation and understanding of what has been submitted into the rulemaking process. I know if I went into regulations.gov and was trying to see what the discourse was surrounding the rule, and I had to sort of, press a button and go through 20 million that were identical in order to find something that is distinctive, that's inhibiting my ability as a member of the public to understand what the issues are that are raised by the, so could, that's why these options are there to be considered by the agency. In my view, obviously that's open to input from the committee. So if you have input on that, please feel free to raise your hand and I'll put you in the queue. I have next Miriam in the queue. So Miriam.
Hi. And this is more of a technical question because it's been a while since I've been on the receiving end of comments in regulations.gov. But I mean, I don't think it works the way that you're presenting it in that comment. When we get the comments in, the comments come into FDMS and we can decide to post them or not. If we post them, it's at that point that the number is reflected in the regulations.gov docket in terms of the number of comments. Is that still the case? And Rebecca's shaking her head no. Okay, because I know that we used to get complaints all the time. Well, the number's wrong. We know we've got, we submitted all these comments and your number's wrong and whatnot. So, okay, then my concern is no longer a concern because the number has been changed. So the number is now reflected on the other side and it doesn't indicate what's public and what's not. So then it doesn't matter. Thank you.
So, Miriam, just if I may follow up for one clarifying, then do you think that this recommendation is sufficient as it's written, or that are you saying that you think it's not necessary?
So I think it's technically possible if, and I agree that trying to slog through that amount of comments or just physically choosing to post that many, make that many comments publicly available. I mean, if an agency decides that we're not going to post 10,000 identical comments that are in fact identical, so that they are, you can't tell from the email or from the information that's the demographic information that's included that they're from different parts of the country, or what the demographics are, and it's a copy paste campaign and for a fact that they're all identical, and the agency's made the decision we're not posting 10,000 that say the exact same thing. I think that is a valid exercise of agency discretion to not put them all in the public docket online, because it's an inordinate amount of effort and time once you've decided that they're all identical. And if the number is reflected that you've got this number, then having the ability for somebody to look and say, okay, well, we've got 10,000 of these, but I only have to read them once. And I don't have to sift through 10,000 to find the next substantive comment. I think that's a benefit to both the public and the agency. How you determine, or how the agency determines what's identical and what's not, I think is a completely different discussion.
Right. Okay.
But this recommendation is a good recommendation and it is technically possible, which was my concern.
Okay, great. Thank you for that helpful comment and clarification too. Thank you. Rebecca, you're next.
Thank you. Yeah, I put my hand up to respond to Anita Mendelson's question, but just to quickly to Miriam's point about counting, I actually think the counting or tallying tools in FDMS are confusing. And I don't want to sort of sidetrack onto that discussion, but until very recently, it would tally all the comments that were submitted electronically, regardless of whether the agency had decided to post them. So you would end up with a mismatch. If you decided not to post something or you were slow to post it, you would have a mismatch. And we've had a lot of inquiries from the public. Are you hiding comments? I want to see the other comments. The current version of FDMS, and maybe there's somebody on here who can speak to it with more education than I have. They have a tally. I don't know where it comes from. It appears to almost ask the commenter how many comments are in their comment. It's very confusing, but that one also doesn't match the number of letters that we received, if that's how you want to count them. And it may be that it's not important to count them, and that's okay, but it is not clear to the public or to me how they get counted. So just to answer her question. But as to not posting mass comments, yeah, it makes the docket really unusable. Unfortunately, the docket tools are kind of limited. We can't easily categorize things. There's not like a tab system where you can dump comments into different buckets and open up subcategories in that sense. And so if you've got a docket full of thousands and thousands of letters, you're opening thousands of tabs on your browser to look at them or printing them out. And if they come in by mail, of course, then you have to potentially scan and upload them. So that's the issue. And we've tried both A and B in my agency. We've tried to post a single representative example and explain that it was just an example. And we've tried to summarize in a supplemental document in the docket what we received. Neither of those is ideal, but we've tried both of those. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Steph, back to you.
Yes, I have Susan Minson here with us. She's OIRA's lead for e-rulemaking, and we actually don't know the answer to your technical question, but we'll take it back and try to provide a response to you via email in terms of whether or not regulations.gov includes the total number of comments or just those that are posted to the docket by the agency. So we'll report back on that, but I just wanted to express general support for the sentiment here, as well as to make a technical comment that the chapeau paragraph up at the top of 2 says we're talking about policies with respect to identical or nearly identical, and then 2B discusses non-identical content. And so I just wasn't sure if that fit under the chapeau, and I think we may need to wordsmith a tiny bit there. But we will get back to you on the technical point with actual information. Sorry about that.
Okay. And what do you have any thoughts, Steph, or do you want to email follow up about the wording there on 2B? I guess what you're saying is that there's no indication in 2B of what you're doing with the identical information, it's only addressing the non-identical information. Okay.
Steph,
did you have a further on that, Stephanie?
You think you're
I think maybe the suggestion would be in the chapeau to say, instead of with respect to identical, maybe just add overlapping after identical, comma, overlapping, comma, or nearly identical comments.
As Danny has indicated there? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. Lon, you're next.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. On the new language at the end, it starts when an agency does not post. Mm-hmm. So you have an agency that doesn't post them, but at the very end it says it still has to provide an opportunity to view all of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's 10,000 identical comments. It doesn't post them. It posts a representative sample, but it still has to provide an opportunity to view all 10,000. Am I reading that correctly?
That's, I think, indeed what it says. Yes. Should it say something like an opportunity to obtain or access in some other fashion?
So that's my question. Then my next question is, well, how does an agency do that? So now it still has to keep them somewhere, right? And provide them to people when asked for?
Right. And I gather this is, and maybe someone who knows the back end of it.
I mean, if that's the case, the agency may as well just post them all, right? Easier.
Well, it's true. It may, you may be right that it doesn't in any way really, except for additional clicks of buttons to go through to say post all of these if they're already in the system. But you know, if there are millions of these, just clicking that button many times could perhaps you know, be something that the agency doesn't view as the best use of agency time. And it also creates what I think it was, I think others have said, maybe it was Rebecca, that from the user's standpoint, this is really problematic if you have to go through every single identical comment and there's so many of them. It makes it very difficult to navigate and learn what the comments are saying about a proposed rule. So that would be.
So, yeah, so I agree. So then the question is, well, how does the agency make them available? All of them.
So I think they could, you know, I would think, indicate that if you would like to see all of the identical comments, you know, here's an email address to request them, and the agency could provide them in some kind of a digital file or something that they could make available. I mean, they should be available under the Freedom of Information Act, if nothing else.
Well, that was my question from the last time, and I think we'll get to it later. Is it, what do you do with 10,000 identical comments? Do you have to keep them all? Mm-hmm. I think you can't just throw them out. And then my question from before was, what goes in the administrative file? What goes in the administrative record? And what has to be available to be sent out on a Freedom of Information Act request? Mm-hmm. And I don't know the answers to those. But I think we're coming up with some of that later on.
And I think we're, you know, I think under this approach, it's the answer to the agency is you can consider alternatives. So you don't have to post them all to regulations.gov for users, but you do need to keep them and make them available on request. That, and you know, is that the answer that the committee should put forward? That's a question for the committee. But I think that the intent here is to try to answer the very question that you asked the last time. Okay. And maybe that's not a satisfactory answer. That's fine too. Well, we can try to improve it if you have suggestions. But that's how I understand this to be responding to the very question that you have in mind, which I think is an important one for agencies. Maybe it could be more clear or in other ways improved, and I welcome any thoughts about that.
Right.
Sarah, thank you very much, Lon. Sarah, you're next.
Yeah, hi. On that topic, I wanted to clarify or explain that FDA's practice is not to remove comments from the docket, but to hide them from view. So my understanding is there's still the terminology of removing from the docket, which I think comes up in number 3, but it's sort of addressed here too. You know, FDA's practice is not to remove anything from the docket. And my understanding is that part of the concern was that the docket reflects exactly the issues that were just raised. The docket kind of reflects the record, and it may even be like these comments may be federal records. And I'm certainly not a records expert, but a concern that you couldn't actually remove them from the docket, but what you can do is hide them from view in certain circumstances. So I bring that up just to say that, yeah, as we kind of see that terminology about removing from the docket, we might want to have another option of hiding from view or clarify what that means.
Mm-hmm. Yes, okay. Good. That's excellent. Are there comments from the consultants on this point of view? I know one consultant nominated another consultant in the chat to speak to this.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add to this great conversation. You know, other than to indicate that in our own conversations as consultants, we definitely, I think over time, went from maybe a sort of a stricter recommendation to a more flexible recommendation on the part of agencies. I think there was concern that if we defaulted to a particular form of posting, like say, which the EPA has historically used, posting one representative comment, that might not work for other agencies and in other circumstances. And so I think we were struggling with, you know, what is the language that we can use that would be not time bound, but really flexible enough for agencies with the broader principle of transparency, yet also workability. So that's how I would kind of summarize our discussion, and how we got to kind of a bulleted point list of possibilities. We didn't want to move in the position of favoring one over the other. So we thought if we list multiple options, but even that might be too specific, given the broader principles at play and the way in which technology and practices change over time. Anyway, thank you.
Right. Now, I think that's a good point. And maybe it goes back even to Sarah, your comment about whether hiding is included in here. You know, I think the goal here is to say, yeah, these three suggestions, if you read this, should consider including different approaches. Okay, and hiding would be a different approach, but the three listed are not exclusive, or just including three that are suggested. And it may be, quite frankly, from the standpoint of an ACUS recommendation and how it could be read, something of a concern to talk about hiding comments. I don't know if that just seems the language may be read in a way that's not intended by any means, but I don't know if that is helpful for folks. Any other comments? Yes, Rebecca.
Sorry, just very quickly on that last point, because Sarah's absolutely right. You can have things in the docket and hide them, and you can even add underneath what it was and why you hid it if you want to. I mean, there's different ways you can play in the docket. So maybe something like remove from view, or there's another way to say that, but I think it's important to include that they're not removed and lost. They're not unread. They're just not on the front page. But honestly, this whole discussion is making me want to go back to FDMS and ask for different tools. And I know that's not ACUS's function, but that might solve a lot of the concerns that we encounter day to day in the docket, is just different ways to manage information there. Thank you.
No, that's a great point. And I think that's the intent here. And the question is, does this language encompass, or does it provide enough guidance to agencies and, quite frankly, to the folks who are running FDMS to convey what we're trying to get at here is to think about how you're going to manage that volume of content. And if you are hiding from view or removing from view or just posting single representative examples, that you don't delete those additional comments, you keep them and you count them. You don't treat them as if they never came in, but recognizing that there may be challenges if you posted or made available for view or demand, kind of confronted the user coming to the docket with all of these identical comments. That could be challenging as well. So I guess, I would urge government members and all members of the committee to think about whether that language is flexible enough over time, whether it's flexible enough and clear enough today as well. Michael, did you want to add to this?
Well, my only thought was, I wonder if it's worth saying, I don't have proposed language, but confronting the problem, which is the unmanageability of the docket if everything is posted. And because the most obvious thing to do is just post everything. It's not confidential, post it. And
right.
so to in the chapeau or elsewhere, just saying that, I mean, the strong thing would be to say, you shouldn't just post everything, literally post everything, because it's cumbersome and makes the docket hard to work with. And instead, agencies should consider A, B, C, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the strong version, but the milder version would just be to flag the underlying problem, which is the manageability of the docket if everything is posted.
I mean, maybe if I could suggest some language following that, if we could, begin with on line 81, begin that sentence something like, if agencies, decide to reduce the cumbersomeness of associated with posting large volumes of identical, overlapping, or nearly identical comments to the docket, or they should consider different approaches to managing these, to managing the display of comments online, just something like that. And then you could put including, including the option for the agency, and then you have the three options. Does something like that speak to the discussion we've been having and help clarify Nina's question and others' concerns? Michael?
Yeah, I think that the language needs a little fiddling.
Sure.
But I think it is helpful. It's just sort of more complete, but it also gets at the hiding issue, right? It's explaining what we're, that it's not hiding, that there's an affirmative goal here. There's a reason for doing this. So I think with some wordsmithing, I personally, I think that's useful, but I'm not a voting member of the committee.
Do any members of the committee have any other comments on 2 as it's reflected currently on your display? Okay, if there are no other comments, then let's move to number 3. Danny, is this also one that we addressed to some extent last time?
No, it's
not. Okay. So this is addressing malattributed comments. An agency policy against submission of malattributed comments should provide that if the agency is aware that it has received such a comment, it either will retain the comment in the docket, but remove the malattribution, that is, render it an anonymous submission, or remove the comment from the docket altogether. So it should, if it's aware that something is malattributed, it has those 2 options outlined for it in this recommendation. But then an agency's policy should at a minimum provide that if it does determine that a malattributed comment will remain in the docket, the agency will anonymize it, not, in other words, contributing still to the malattribution, will anonymize the comment to protect the person whose identity has been used. Any comments on recommendation 3 as drafted? Lon?
Yeah, a similar comment before. If an agency removes it from the docket altogether, what does it do with the docket?
Does it keep the, I think here removing it from the docket altogether suggests it's not keeping it. Is that,
means it's
could we make
away?
that clear? And is that the right answer?
Yeah, that's my question. Can it throw it away? It's an official government document. Can you just do that, or do you need to get NARA's approval for that?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody want to speak specifically to this question? Sarah, I know you're in the queue. I don't know if you have something specifically on that point. If not, we will come back. Michael, you raised your hand. Did you want to respond specifically to Lon's question?
Yeah, I don't know the answer in terms of the Federal Records Act, but at least I think from the point of view of the report, the notion that what's behind this recommendation is that, and what the consultant's report says, is that if an agency has a policy of refusing to accept malattributed comments, it can reject them, just like an agency can reject comments that are filed after the comment period is over, right? Often agencies accept them despite their rule, but it would not violate the APA to say, sorry, you're late, you missed the deadline, we're ignoring your comment, and it's not going in the docket. I mean, I realize people often do put it in the docket and then they say we may or may not look at it. But what this was anticipating, as Carrie just said a moment ago, at least in our view, I think, was that an agency could really refuse to accept such a comment. And therefore it would mean, no, you can't find it anywhere. They are throwing it out. That was my understanding.
And whether throwing it out means literally, shredding it and it no longer exists at all, or whether it still has to be retained for Federal Records Act compliance, that's not what this recommendation is really aiming at. It's just from the standpoint of the rulemaking process, it's not part of the docket. And so it doesn't exist for purposes of the agency record in the rulemaking, but not necessarily in, for Records Act compliance purposes. All right. Thank you. Lon, does that answer, by the way, address your question and concern?
I think so. I guess my personal problem is I'm not sure exactly what we mean by the docket. Is the docket what's going to end up being identical to the administrative record in case there's a challenge to the regulation, or is it something different?
I think it is the term of art often that is equivalent to the administrative record. I mean, maybe that could be clearer by saying comment from the rulemaking docket altogether, or from the rulemaking record, if that would, rulemaking docket or record.
Well, I don't know how to draft it now, but
okay.
When again, I may be using the wrong terminology, but we used to talk about the administrative record is what goes to the court, and the administrative file is always a document.
Or you could say rulemaking docket or administrative record. And this may be a function of how different agencies, what their terminology might be. So maybe that would clarify it. Yes?
This is one issue that I think would be helpful for the staff to look at after the meeting. There's some past ACUS history here, including a recommendation on the administrative record. And we might want to make sure that the terminology used here is, to the extent possible, is consistent with the prior ACUS recommendations. We also, I just point out, have an ongoing working group on the compilation of the administrative record. And so it might be just useful for the staff to take a look at this after the meeting.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments on 3? Rebecca, you had your hand up a moment ago. Are you okay to move on, or did you have something on this still?
I was going to suggest something very similar to what Matt did, and specifically we just did the PII recommendation, which would have dealt with a lot of similar issues of what you can display publicly, which is not necessarily the same as what would be in your administrative record. So I imagine we dealt with that.
Okay, another excellent cross-reference for ACUS staff. All right, let's move to recommendation number 4. agencies and relevant coordinating bodies, which has been identified in the previous recommendation as meaning, if I'm not correct, if you could scroll up just a touch, Danny, do we, maybe a little bit, maybe it's in recommendation 2. Do we ever recognize what is a coordinating body up until this point in time? Or is that farther down? Yeah, it's in 9. Now, if this whole section, and I guess this would be a question to come back to as well, if this whole section should be moved to the bottom, then that would be fine. But otherwise, it should be clarified. But anyway, they should consider providing materials that explain to prospective commenters what information is useful to an agency in a public comment. These materials could include various formats to reach different audiences, such as videos or FAQs. These materials may also be statements in the agency's NPRMs or on an agency website to explain the comment process and explain here that agencies seriously consider any substantive public comment from any person. All right, so we have already here a couple of comments that were suggested and came in by Nina on this particular draft comment. And this was also where Randy May's suggestion had, in our first half of our meeting today, come into play. So instead of substantive, Nina Mendelsohn is recommending we replace that with the word relevant. So I don't know that that should hopefully not be too problematic to change that. It's certainly consistent with the spirit there, I think, of what was intended. Are there any other comments? Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. I was wondering also, just this is maybe in the spirit of what Emily Bremer had raised earlier. This one struck me also as maybe possibly a candidate for reordering. Thought maybe it could come first here. It seems like it's the most umbrella and sort of the broadest picture. So if we were going to do reordering, it might just a suggestion that maybe it would be the first in this section. It seems to say broadly. That's one just general thought. And then I think that the other points which follow are more specific about how to deal with identical and nearly identical comments, that they seem to dig into the weeds a little bit more. So that's just an organization.
Right. Okay. Okay, thank you. I think that's certainly open for comment, and if anybody has any objections, certainly air them. Otherwise, I think that makes sense to me, certainly. Susan from OMB.
I actually had a very similar comment to Kevin about this recommendation number 4. It seemed broader, and in terms of providing agency guidance or policy, whatever happened to be calling it, to be upfront, and it would be great to provide, if the agency could also provide examples of what that might look like.
Yeah, I wonder if there are, this would be something we could check with the consultants, and maybe dropping a footnote somewhere in the preamble, for example, to highlight that some agencies are already dealing with this, and you could provide some page references, perhaps. There are examples. Other comments on 4? Okay, Kevin, your hand is up, but I assume it's still left up from the last time. Okay. Number 5 then. In notices of proposed rulemaking, notices of inquiry, and advance notices of proposed rulemaking, agencies should ask specific questions and identify particular types of information that would be useful in developing the proposal. Is this something that would make any objections or concerns or suggestions about this one. And Kevin, would this go along? Would this be moved in what you're proposing in terms of the order, or would this be appropriate to keep at the end?
It seems to me that this would also go up along with 4. It's sort of in that more general. This one's, I guess number 5 also has this distinct, I endorse its content. I'll leave aside, and because I leave aside a little bit how exactly it pertains to the scope of this project, but that's fine. It doesn't, I don't object to it. So yeah, I would think that probably it would go up to start this section. And then we would get into the more specific questions about how to deal with identical or near identical comments in that discussion we've had.
I mean, I wonder if what is now 5 should be just built in a final sentence in 4 and then moved to the top of this. And I also wonder if it should be framed, should consider asking. I mean, there may be many notices of proposed rulemaking where, maybe the agency doesn't have any specific questions, or that's not appropriate, but that's a possible refinement, perhaps. Emily?
So on the one hand, I'm inclined to view this as obviously a fine recommendation. And on the other hand, I'm also inclined to view it as not really a matter of the technical matter of processing. So I do wonder if, in keeping with the conversation we've had so far, if this would be better left out.
Okay. Anybody want to speak to the leaving out what is number 5?
Can I chime in? I'm sorry, Michael, you're ahead of me. I should have raised my hand.
Well, no, you're ahead of him because he's a consultant on this one. So go ahead, Nina.
I didn't realize that lowered your status, Michael.
Yeah.
It was already so low, how far can we go?
So, I definitely appreciate Emily's point. And I actually also think that kind of giving examples as was mentioned in connection with paragraph 4 might also implicate this issue. But I actually think that if agencies want answers to particular questions, they want input on kinds of information that might just kind of be out there in the world, I don't see any downside in them asking for it, as long as it doesn't imply that they won't consider comments that don't specifically answer these questions. So I would certainly be comfortable with leaving it in, even though I think this is an issue we should generally be sensitive to.
Do you think we should add a clause at the end? Should consider, in addition to inviting any and all comments, asking specific questions or something along those lines?
That would certainly serve the goal of not discouraging comments generally. I'm not sure that I have particular language to suggest, although I'm certainly willing to try to suggest some offline.
Okay. All right. I'm going to...
Can you repeat again just so I capture it?
So I said something like, should consider, comma, in addition to inviting any and all comments on the proposal or something along those lines. Should consider then clause, in addition to the generic call for comments, asking specific questions. Something along those lines. We could. All right. Bill, I'm going to give you priority here and have Michael, unless you're directly on any of these points, please don't hesitate. I'm going to come back to you, but if you have something specifically directly on this point, I definitely would like to have you come in. So,
I was just going to suggest some language. I mean, my comment was very much along Nina's lines, but maybe the way to phrase it would be, to the extent agencies have specific questions or are aware of particular types of information that would be useful, they should identify those questions and that information in the proposed rulemaking.
Okay, we'll
I totally
Donnie.
share Nina's concern. You don't, you know, what if the whole idea is this is to answer the agency's questions, you lose a bunch of potentially very valuable comments that come at the problem from a way the agency wasn't thinking. And that's what one wants to avoid.
And quite frankly, go back to Bridget's point about the very future of potential computer-generated comments. You could imagine a world where that kind of specificity could inform some kind of automated machine to help find answers, perhaps. Bill, you're next.
So, you know, everything that was just said, I love. And I think the suggested language from Michael is also fine. Partially I love it because it's what we do at my agency. But also there is sort of this question about what does this particular recommendation have to do with, you know, mass commenting, duplication, et cetera. And if the reason that we're including it is something like, with the belief that, you know, if the reason we're including it is because we believe that by giving commenters guidance, we'll get less irrelevant stuff or something, then we should probably say, we explain why this is a recommendation as part of the recommendation. Because it's just good rulemaking practice, period. But I don't know that it's particularly responsive to this topic. But if it is, we should just say why. Absolutely no objection to keeping it in there. We might augment it by saying what the rationale is.
Right. It may help those who are organizing mass comment campaigns to know what, you know, points to address, you know, and then it could make and as I've suggested, they could even help with bots that are, you know, so maybe it could be something as simple as to, you know, encourage the most relevant submissions, you know, agencies should, when they, and then we should, to the extent they have specific questions or are aware of specific types of information that would be useful, you know.
Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons I love it is because I'm hung up on the idea of significance. And, you know, if an agency is telling you, here's a subset of stuff that we think would make the comment significant, yeah, great, right. Include it, tell us.
Right.
That's it.
Thank you. Lon, you're next.
Yeah, I was thinking the same sort of thing. If an agency thinks that this would help focus mass comments, then the agency could ask specific questions. And if that's the case, then it stays in. And otherwise, Emily's point that this is beyond scope is a good one.
So do you really think with the addition of that as drafted, it makes it more relevant now to encourage the most relevant submissions?
To encourage the most relevant, or to keep the comments, or to
just
encourage
even
the most, to help focus comments. Yes. Then it can stay in. Otherwise, I think Emily's point is a good one.
Mm-hmm. Emily, how does that sound to you?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. All right. Any other comments then on draft number 5? Okay. If none, let's turn to 6. As soon as you're ready, Danny. Yeah. Okay, so agencies should have access to reliable and appropriate software to identify the unique content in submitted comments and to extract meaningful information from comments. this software should provide agencies with enhanced search options based upon the unique content of comments. I think this is one we discussed the last time.
That's right.
Would it, in keeping with our use of the word relevant as opposed to substantive earlier and relevant in the preceding, should we change meaningful information to relevant information? Other comments, and that's not the only one, obviously. So, Susan, you're first.
Great, thank you so much. I was just curious. I know sometimes agencies and or the e-rulemaking PMO have trouble identifying the best types of software that folks could use. Does the committee have any suggestions or examples that can be provided to sort of guide agencies or the e-rulemaking PMO?
It's a good question, and certainly, if the consultants have any concrete examples, that would be helpful. I guess, probably repair to a comment Steve Balla made earlier, that there is a timeless quality, if you will, to ACUS recommendations, and whatever examples we might say, point to today would probably be out of date in another year or two. It could possibly be. But it's a good question, and if any of the consultants have suggestions, maybe you can relay those to ACUS staff on the next for the next drafting of this. Emily, you're next.
Thanks. So I know we discussed this last meeting, but that language at the beginning that agencies should have access to, I just think is just so weird. I mean, like, who should give them like, who are we recommending this to? Like, is this access just like out in the universe, or should they like do something? I mean, so I just think it's weird. And if the recommendation is to the e-rulemaking PMO to make available technological tools or advice, then that makes sense to me. And if it's that agencies should seek this out or should use what is available, that makes more sense to me. But the present formulation just raises a lot of questions for me.
Yeah, I think the formulation is a bit awkward. I think the intent here is to try to do indicate that agencies could meet this recommendation, if you will, in one of two ways. Either if they run their own dockets, getting their own software, or two, rely on what regulations.gov provides.
So if that's the intention, then maybe it would make more sense to have a recommendation that agencies should use the tools that are available to them and break it out as, those that use e-rulemaking, that use the regulations.gov system should seek out advice, or that the e-rulemaking PMO should make certain things available, and that agencies that have their own sites should do whatever. But the present formulation, I especially because embedded in the project, I do have some general sense of what it means, but I just feel like when I pick up this recommendation 4 years from now, or if I picked up this recommendation and I wasn't involved in the process, that I would just be like, what does that mean? Like, what do you want me to do?
Would it be better just even to say should use reliable and appropriate software?
I think so. Although I think we also have basically that same recommendation in the legal considerations and e-rulemaking recommendation. So it might be worth it for staff to look. I haven't looked at it in a while, but we might consider whether we're just reiterating something we've already said before. And if so, I think there's a reasonable question: what does this add?
Sarah?
Yeah, just on the idea of use, I think one thing maybe we had talked about last time is there may be like in a lot of circumstances at my agency, we don't need to use deduplication software. It's just rare to have the level of comments where we use it. And so I think the idea was, if we said use, then I worry that that implies that we should use it all the time. And that we would want something to clarify that it would be in relevant circumstances or as needed.
Would it make sense to preface the sentence with when needed to manage and or when needed to process large volumes of comments, agencies should use?
Yeah, I think that would definitely help.
It helps also in another way, and I just want to flag this as a general issue for the committee, I think, to think about for however long you want, maybe 10 seconds. But we are, remember, dealing with, in this recommendation, mass comments, as well as computer generated comments, as well as these malattributed comments. And maybe little phrases like that help remind the reader that, you know, this recommendation 6 is really speaking more to the mass comments than, say, a malattributed comment, because I don't think 6 is going to identify necessarily a single if there's a single malattributed comment that comes in, 6 is certainly not going to address that. So that may be an added value to adding clauses like that in this particular context, where maybe in other ACUS recommendations it's not as much needed because the preamble is so focused around one single kind of phenomenon or issue that it should be clear. But here it may be really helpful because of the different kinds of commenting that we're addressing. Emily, by the way, does this now help outside of the concern about possible duplication with the earlier recommendation, assuming there's no duplication, is this more to your satisfaction?
I think this is an improvement.
Excellent. Are there other comments on 6? Let's see if we can go to 7 then. I think this was addressed last time, so let's be very quick. I mean, certainly if there's something that people want to add, and is there already one comment? No, it's just that was reviewed at the last meeting. Susan?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, could ACUS clarify that this recommendation applies to agencies that are not part of the e-rulemaking program? Because the regulations.gov does have reCAPTCHA, and
right.
We did that recently. We just want to make sure that that's clear.
Would adding the words "their own" commenting platforms that operate their own, would that help clarify that, Susan?
Sure.
Okay. Any other comments on number 7? Number 8, then. The e-rulemaking program should provide a common deduplication platform for agencies to use, although agencies should be free to modify it or use another platform as appropriate. I believe this also follows from the last time. Any comments? Susan?
Did we only want to leave that to the deduplication platform? Did we want to ask them to provide other tools for the agency? I think we talked about that in 6. It may be, if I don't know if you do want to ask them to do more for their partner agencies.
I think we left that 6 up, you know, someone should provide it. you know, they should use it. If they can use it from e-rulemaking, fine, but I don't know that we were, at least based on the last time, thinking that it necessarily had to be provided by the e-rulemaking program. I think there is a difference also between what 6 is addressing, which is sort of the uniqueness of the content of a comment. Maybe this is the same thing. What is the difference? That's a good question now. What is the difference between a deduplication platform and number 6? Could we scroll down a little bit? This is identifying unique content. I think, you know, there may be differences in agencies about what constitutes unique content, perhaps. It was, I think, maybe one of Nina's very first comments today suggested maybe the geographic location or the fact that a comment came from a tribal entity or the like could matter in some contexts where maybe that could be considered unique content. But it's a good question. What's the difference between 6 and 8? Any insights from our consultants on this? Is the silence because they really are saying the same thing? Rebecca.
Sorry, I'll defer to a consultant if they want to answer.
No, go ahead. No,
okay.
No consultant has raised their hand.
So what I recall from the last meeting was that a lot of these kind of awkward intro phrases came from the attempt to make a distinction between those who use e-rulemaking and those who have some other platform of their own agency's creation. And part of that is because those of us who use the e-rulemaking program are unlikely to find the funds to go make something in addition. So it says you should use this. If e-rulemaking doesn't provide it, we're not going to have it. And I believe that's where that's coming from, is that it may have in reorganization gotten lost, but I think that's what the history was.
Sure, I understand that. I'm wondering though, what's the difference between software that identifies unique content and a deduplication platform? Aren't those basically the same thing? So I mean, you could perhaps you can combine that to say, you know, when provided by the e-rulemaking program, that's sufficient or something along those lines. But it seems to me that those are the same functions. But Andrew, you want not necessarily. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I don't see them as exactly the same. I mean, I think the e-rulemaking program's deduplication tool is helpful when you're looking at huge numbers of comments, and it's the deduplication is helping you see that there are 100,000 form letters that are mostly saying the same thing, and they're 80 to 90% identical or something like that. In 6, when you're talking about sort of software that help you identify unique content, I mean, my office has been dealing with public comments, since before my time. Since I've only been doing it for like 25 years, and our office has been since the early 80s. And the real task for the rule writer under the APA is identifying the significant issues and addressing those significant issues. So we have developed and used software that helps the agency identify the unique issues, extract the meaningful information from the comments, so they can help you actually do your comments analysis. But if you receive 1 million comments, a deduplication tool can help you get rid of 999,000 comments that have different levels of identical material. And so that's what I would see as the number 8 stuff. But the kind of software we use, it can help you with that, but where it really is focusing on is identifying the significant issues and categorizing the significant issues. So I would definitely see these as different, but at least in my view, I'm not sure if that was the intent of the consultants, but in my view, I see these as different types of software that can be useful for different parts of the project.
Right. Although the way 6 is worded, it seems not to completely encompass the kind of tools that you're talking about, which would not only identify unique comment, but allow sorting of it and analysis of how, how those issues are arising. Whereas just identifying it, but yeah, I mean, it may be that we need to, I mean, unless there's something else, let me suggest that the staff will kind of work on maybe combining 6 and 8 so that, and taking into account Andrew's point about the possible different functionalities that could arise between just at first blush, figuring out how many identical comments there are, and then perhaps second, using software which should still be reliable and appropriate. I'm sure you would agree with, everybody would agree with that, for identifying issues and maybe identifying and analyzing issues that arise from the non-identical comments, essentially. Does that seem to capture what 6 and 8 together would be trying to do? Bridget?
Yeah, I completely defer to you on how the committee should handle the recommendations. I was just going to suggest that maybe Danny could put this question back to the consultant team to see if there was something that we were trying to parse out here. I just don't remember if we were. So I think it would probably be good to just touch base on that among the consultants.
Great. All right, we have 3 minutes left, and where are we now, Danny? We have 9 out of, we're at number 9, and there's about 8 more. So we will, I think, at this juncture, probably see if maybe, are there any comments on 9 at all? Bridget, your hand is still up from the last time, or did you have something further on that? Okay, so hearing no comments on 9, let's just take a quick look at number 10, which is even shorter than 9. Susan?
Just a quick comment similar to the suggested tools and technology to use if there's any type of agency that has training that's developed, or private industry folks or academia or something like that, if there's some way to identify, like right now, I wouldn't know where to go to get training on this other than just having done it in my experience.
Right, it may suggest that there's, after adoption of a recommendation like this, perhaps ACUS could facilitate some, I don't know, some information sharing between agencies and some kind of interagency discussion. Matt already mentioned a follow-on meeting of some sort that's planned. But
I was just wondering if maybe the recommendation should think about the previous step of agencies needing to develop training.
So it could be that number 10 should be reworded, agencies should develop and offer, or develop or offer, develop and offer. I don't know. We can wordsmith that. I mean, if there is something already on the shelf, then maybe they don't need to develop it. Okay. I think we've reached a nice stopping point. We have docket management still to go. We do have another meeting that is scheduled for, if I can find it in my notes, I think it's the next meeting is in May. I'm not mistaken. And I want to say May 11th, but yes,
That's right.
Tuesday, May 11th from 1 to 4. We will see some revisions in this document to reflect what we've discussed today. I think our first item of business at our third meeting will be to focus on the remaining recommendations, and then take a look at any revisions that were made in light of today's discussion to the preceding recommendations. And then we can turn lastly to the preamble, which again, if you have suggestions from this morning's discussion, please send them in. If you have suggestions from this afternoon's discussion on the recommendations, certainly please send those in as soon as you can. So the staff can take them into account.
One thing on the suggestions, I think it's fine if members of the committee have drafting suggestions with respect to, especially the preambular language that we talked about earlier. It's fine to, I think it's fine, Reeve, to just send them in to the staff. I mean, we're happy to post them as formal comments if they're styled as such and prepared as such. But you know, if you just want to share some informal thoughts with us or some very tentative language, you can sort of feel free to route that through the staff. Is that okay, Reeve?
Exactly. No, I think that's perfect.
Okay. All right, and we will see everybody, I hope, on May 11th, if you're able to join us then. I want to thank all of you for your excellent discussion, the committee members, the ACUS members, those who have visited, welcome and glad you came. Want to echo my earlier remarks about the ACE consultant team, and thank you for your help. And as always, want to thank ACUS staff, Danny in particular, for the tremendous work that she's been putting into this project so far, and I know will continue to as well. So with that, we are concluded for today. And Matt, is there anything else that you wanted to share before we close?
I do not. Thank you very much.
Okay. With that, have a good rest of the day, and we'll see you on May 11th. Take care.